All right, what is going on, everyone? And welcome back to the Mets Weekly Podcast. We are live at this very moment to recap on YouTube and on X the Mets versus Brewers series, plus the one game that we had in Atlanta, and all of the craziness that has been going on this week since we last talked on this podcast. Kind of had to delay the next episode because of the Brave series, and now we have kind of pieced it all together, and we are getting ready to break down and dissect everything that's going on in Mets land because it is a lot of craziness. But before we do that, I want to remind everyone, like I do every single time, to subscribe to the Mets Weekly YouTube channel for this very podcast, which is now recorded live on Sundays and Thursdays. It probably will eventually change by that time, following every single series of games. For those of you watching on playback and you want to join the conversation, make sure to turn on post notifications on our YouTube channel to know when we go live. It's the best way to communicate with us because usually the Twitter comments don't come in very, very smoothly. For those of you in the live chat right now, we want to let you guys know we love reading your comments, your questions, your concerns. And if you feel like you're being ignored, you're not being ignored. You're just being starred throughout the show so we can try and pull up as many as we can to keep the flow of the conversation going. Also, make sure to follow Mets Weekly on X and on TikTok, which mainly features Frank's instant reactions after every single Mets game, titled The Mets Frankly Postgame, which he has 2 more to do for the rest of the regular season. For those of you on audio, make sure to follow us on all of your favorite audio platforms, all your favorite listening platforms, to not miss the audio version of new episodes that drop at 8 a.m. the following day that these are recorded. So let's get into episode number 86 and what an episode this is about to be, because we are currently sitting with, I don't know if it's our backs against the wall, but there is a lot at stake in the next 24 hours. The Mets just left Milwaukee struggling, but they were able to pull out a win, their first win against Milwaukee this year. Most likely will have to beat them if they do get into the playoffs, but that's not what we're worried about at this current moment. We know we are going into Atlanta after that series was delayed. We'll talk about the situation with that as well. We'll talk about this Brewers series, and then, of course, previewing the doubleheader. Now, Frank, it's been a while since the last time we spoke on this podcast. It's been a little bit. We had to move some things around due to a hurricane in Atlanta, which, again, I still think that the Braves just created so that they could avoid us clinching on their field. But Frank, how are you feeling right now? Because not only do we have 2 games left, there's only 2 games left in the entire baseball season. Nobody else has any games left, but the Mets are Braves. All eyes are going to be on us, and all eyes are going to be on the Mets to hopefully just win 1 game in Atlanta. So how you feeling? Is there nerves? Are you excited? I mean, unpack it all.
Yeah, it's a little bit of everything because this year has been a roller coaster of a season with how things got off to a slow start. Mets fall way out of it. Then they go on the hot run. Then they get in a playoff spot. And now it's just such a fitting that it's going to come down to a absolutely crazy ending. A ending that you might only see a couple of times in a lifetime, as far as, like you said, us being the only ones that have an extra day to play because of a hurricane that happened. So it's something that is you don't normally see. I think it's something that, whether win or loss, I think we're always going to go back to it down the road. Be like, oh, remember 2024 when the Mets were in the wild card race? They did that doubleheader in Atlanta on Monday. And how we look back on it, do we look at it fondly, or it's just like one of the worst days in Mets history? That remains to be seen. But what I do like is that they put themselves in a position where they just have to split it. What I was afraid of is if they needed to sweep the doubleheader, that would have been a very tough ask. But just to split it, and with this whole idea of maybe if Atlanta wins game 1, they really have no sense to win game 2, don't have any sense to start Chris Sale for game 2. So there is something to that extent as well. But the Braves not trying against the Mets just sounds like blasphemy. You know
Yeah,
what I mean? Like
bullshit.
I just yeah,
Bullshit.
like as nice as it would be, I just don't see that happening. But overall, again, this is kind of what you play for. I mean, you play for to have the last day of it, another day after the regular season matter so much to where win or loss depends whether you're in or you're out. And it couldn't get any closer to this. Like you have on this graphic, we have a three-way tie right now for two spots. So it's that game of musical chairs. Eventually the music is going to stop. There's two seats left. I mean, who are going to be the two that are sitting there? Will it be Mets in Atlanta, Mets in Arizona, Arizona in Atlanta? There's a lot of different ways that this could go. So it is very interesting. I would love it if we could sweep Atlanta, but at this point, I'll just be happy with one. But overall, it's just been a crazy week, especially losing that first game in Atlanta. Then you have the whole hurricane scenario we'll get to. The first couple games in Milwaukee go ugly. So, I mean, there definitely has been quite a roller coaster of emotions, and you're feeling kind of down. But then they pick you back up today with a nice win. How much Milwaukee was trying, but what matters is that you won the game. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. So I'm just excited that they have this opportunity. I'm nervous. I'm very nervous, but you know what? They've beat the Braves before this season. Like they've won some games from them. So to just win one, I mean, they're not asking an insane amount here. It's like just win a game. Like you got to do it, because it's like we always say, you want to be a playoff team, you got to win these kind of games because once you get in there and you're facing these good rotations on a daily basis, just winning the last game against Milwaukee isn't enough. Like you have to win the series. So that's just a good test for them. And you know what? It's important for a lot of these guys to kind of get that experience under their belts and just kind of being in these big spots because if you want to be a sustained winner, you got to be comfortable in these situations. You got to get those battle reps and just kind of be battle tested. This way, like, know what? We've been here before. We could handle this. So it's something Alonso has talked about and Nimmo talked about. I don't see the improvement from 2022 as far as how they play in big games, but we'll see if this year kind of changes that.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think that it's all come down to this, and we knew that it was going to. We've talked about it since the beginning of September. The Mets and Braves is what this is going to come down to, no matter how you want to spin it, whether it got delayed or not, whether they end the season this way. It's going to go down to that series in Atlanta. Atlanta, the house of horrors for the Mets, but they're going to have to figure it out. And it's a weird way to kind of parallel this to 2022, where we talked about the division as the main goal. Now it's just getting into the playoffs. But the goal is the same. You have to win just one goddamn game in Atlanta in September. It's the same goal. Can they achieve it this time? Boy, I hope so. Because it is going to be quite the heartbreaker and an even bigger heartbreaker to do it on the last day of the season. We've seen the Mets do that before, years ago. We won't recall it, but it has happened before. So hopefully the Mets can clutch up in this way and they can spin the narrative where they have to just do the bare minimum, being one win. You have two tries to get one win. We will get into that series eventually. But speaking of the series that created this doubleheader, we obviously had, I'm not going to say a controversy, but kind of an outrage going on with how they treated this hurricane situation in Atlanta. Now, we all knew that this was approaching, of course, and we knew that there were going to be precautions made, but I feel like, and I think everybody can agree here, I personally am not someone who plays this victim mentality as a Mets fan. I've always been someone who continues to say, well, most of the failures of the Mets, they did to themselves. Where you're talking about, oh, well, if there is a God out there, he hates the Mets. Everything is always against the Mets. It's everybody else's fault. The Mets have no one to blame. I personally am not mad at the Braves for how they treated this because it's kind of just more of a face of reality. Revenue is something that teams care about. I'm not surprised. I'm not someone who is completely outraged and just like head over, just beside himself that an MLB team cares about money, cares about revenue, and did not want to move it up. There was also some talk about moving the start times up that ended up being canceled. That the Mets did not. The Mets also rejected something on the way back. I'm not sure. What I'm kind of upset about and what I am a little bit concerned about going forward is kind of how the MLB kind of enabled this to happen by not making a decision. I personally think, and listen, you can't control the weather. You don't know what's going to happen. You have to squeeze every single bit of it if you can possibly play. We know that we've seen the Mets do that at Citi Field. We've seen them drag things out. They've been better with it recently. But when it comes to the situation in Atlanta, when you're talking about extreme measures such as a hurricane, I feel like there just had to be a little bit more of, I don't know, a plan, some kind of emergency, like, well, if this happens, we're expecting this to happen. And I just don't think that I just don't think that the decision should have just been made. I feel like you had a little bit more of evidence for this situation to not come to where you made the decision less than 2 hours before the game even started. And I feel like that is where I'm a little bit frustrated in the way. Either way, whether you talk about it from the Mets being cursed or the Mets being this, the MLB hates the Mets, they're double agents with the Braves, wherever you want to look at it, in any conspiracy level, the Mets still have to win these games. They still have to win the games no matter what, no matter the circumstance. So I don't know how you feel about this, Frank, but I feel like I'm just a little bit frustrated that we just don't have, they just didn't seem to have any kind of plan until the very end. And the fact that this is happening during a very crucial playoff race, it's just a little bit more mind-numbing factors to think about. I don't know if that's how you feel, but that's kind of how I feel.
Yeah, I mean, the whole situation was honestly a disaster. It was avoidable. And the thing that really bothered me the most was when they asked Mendoza about, like, oh, like, what have you heard from MLB? Like, what have they been telling you? And he basically said nothing. Like, he said, like, they have not really been much in contact with the Mets about what the plan is as far as, like, okay, we know a hurricane is coming. What do we do about these two upcoming games? Is there a neutral site? Is there maybe a doubleheader Tuesday? Maybe playing the game in the morning on Wednesday. Like, there was a few different avenues they could have gone to get these games in, and they went with none of them. And, when it comes to the Braves, that's the part that there's a few things that happen here. So I understand the Met fans are like, oh, curse against the Mets, out to get the Mets, things like that. It's not great for the Braves either. And this is kind of where I'm a little confused from the Atlanta standpoint. You wanted to make sure that these were home games for Atlanta, that they were in the primetime slot, so not the morning, because you wanted to get that massive attendance number. You wanted to get like the 40,000, the sellout, and whatever, because that was important for them. They want to make money. I understand that. My counter is that better option than playing the doubleheader Monday with the possibility of losing Chris Sale and not having him available when you have to fly the next day on Tuesday for the playoff series. So even if Atlanta's the team that gets out of this and the Mets don't, they still have to fly onto the road to start a playoff series very next day, while the other team you're facing had a day off and they're just waiting for you. So, and if Atlanta loses Sale, they don't have him for the series. So I just don't understand how that's better for Atlanta. I mean, again, it's not me. I'm not running the business, but I feel like trying to have the best opportunity of advancing in the next series to then have more playoff games and you could have some home games where you could really sell a lot of money. I feel like that should be more important business than just trying to have these games happen in Atlanta. And what's going to
Yeah.
happen is that now this Monday game at 1 o'clock and 4 o'clock, you still didn't get that 7 o'clock slot. So
Yeah.
you didn't achieve that goal. Now, listen, is everybody in Atlanta just not going to go to work tomorrow and show up to the games and they still have a great number? I don't know, maybe. I mean, a lot of people nowadays don't work Mondays, so it's certainly possible. But I just think overall, I just don't think this worked out quite the way it should have from the Atlanta standpoint. Like, I don't really understand that much of a benefit for them. Now, on the flip side, I mean, first of all, when the schedule was made, they were trying to hurt the Mets in every way they can travel wise. By having that Thursday game be a night game, Mets had to fly to Milwaukee. But the other thing they have in their advantage is they were home this weekend for the Royals. Of course, the Friday game got played, even though there was rain in the forecast. So, of course, that went as planned.
Yeah.
But to have the Mets fly to Milwaukee and then fly to Atlanta, and then they're going to have to fly somewhere else, just constant back and forth, I can understand them wanting the doubleheader Monday because they're just waiting for the Mets as they're the ones doing the traveling. So, I could understand that part of it as well. But I think one of the other big issues is kind of what it led to, what happened in San Diego, and kind of what happened with the Brewers today, where you had these games that were really massive for certain teams and meant absolutely nothing for other teams, and just the kind of product you got, because they're trying to hype this up as, oh, everyone's got to watch what happens on Sunday, the wild card race. They're going to be these big games, and you have the Arizona games a blowout because the Padres didn't try. And by all accounts, the Brewers did not go out either. So, I mean, they talked about on apparently WFN that they think the Padres lost today to screw the Mets and the Braves. I could understand the thought process because for San Diego to call up Matt Waldron from the minor leagues and he's getting bombed and they're still leaving him out there just shows you that they really didn't care too much about today's game because they wanted the doubleheader to happen. There was this possibility that maybe the doubleheader doesn't happen at all if it
Yeah.
just meant seeding purposes. So I could understand why San Diego would want them to lose so that either team, whatever team gets to San Diego, is going in there tired and has
Yeah.
their players used up and maybe use some of their star pitchers. So I can understand from the San Diego standpoint, and for Milwaukee, like, they didn't want to jeopardize anything because they're going to be facing the other half of this group. So I understand that part of it. But I just feel like for MLB, if they wanted good business, I feel like you'd want those Padres and Milwaukee games to mean a little more than they did, because those two games were just not even worth watching. And even for Atlanta, like, they lost, said like, whatever, we'll just win one tomorrow. So I don't know. I just feel like there's no right or wrong answer here. But what I didn't like was, like you said, the no communication. And then, like, they were talking about the broadcast today about what's going to happen tomorrow. Are they going to play these games? Not going to play these games depending on seeding. The way Gary was like, I think MLB just wants it to play out and hope the situation just figures itself out because they don't want to do the hard work. Like, they don't want to actually have to plan things out and, like, be smart. They just kind of want baseball to happen and just things happen and it's all over.
Yeah, obviously they have the playoffs coming up, and I feel like they want to direct it to that. And they just want to kind of just let everything fall into place. And they don't want to be the bad guys. The problem is that when you continually like say, okay, well, let's wait and see what happens. Let's see how this goes. You're also kind of putting into the other category as to where with the MLB trying to squeeze out as much as they can, squeeze out them as much as you can until there's a possibility. Like it seemed like when it came to, and I was expecting them to kind of make a decision, like, I don't know, a half hour before it was like less than 2 hours before that second game that was supposed to be done. But then it ended up getting canceled. But to me, it really showed me that it's like, okay, a 0.1% of playing that game is enough for them to just wait and see how this thing fizzles out. And it really just shows, to me, it's like the MLB does not give a shit about you. They don't care. They do not care about you whatsoever, and they never will. Because when we're talking about a hurricane here, we are talking about we're not talking about anything of the technicalities of, oh, how are we going to schedule these games into the playoffs? We're talking about a hurricane. We are talking about, the safety of fans, the safety of these players. And the fact that we continue to have these just unreasonable things that continue to happen. And we'll also get into another thing in the Brewers series regarding the umpires, obviously. We'll talk about that as well, where it seems like nobody is held accountable for just doing absolutely nothing, and then nobody is held accountable for doing something. Like, it seems like every single time when you're in the middle here, they just want to just find out how this works. And that is not the way to treat it when you have I don't know if it's called a state of emergency, when you have a natural disaster that could fly through the situation. The Mets were able to get to Milwaukee early. It didn't look like they got to Milwaukee early because they basically slept through the first 2 games. We'll get into that. But, like, you also talk about it, like, from, we don't know how we're going to be able to travel. It backs that up as well, because they continued to not make decisions. And they continued to roll this thing out until they could finally make the call. And that's just holding every single thing up. And also, it kind of translated to things that I was kind of working on with this podcast. The same thing kind of happened with this. And I'm not trying to compare it to a hurricane, obviously, but I'm just saying in translation, most of the information that I have that we can go over for this, I had to wait until that Milwaukee game was done. Like, I had interchangeable segments that we could have done if the Mets clinched or if they didn't. And that's all because of how it all lined up in this series, with how every single other game lined up in this series. It all just continued to be a trickle-down effect. And even though it seems like it's going to be a harder road with the no rest whatsoever for the Mets, no matter what, you also add on top of it as to where even if the Mets win both games in Atlanta, let's say that, you were in Milwaukee, you were in Atlanta, and then you go to San Diego. That's 3 different time zones in 3 days. I mean, that's kind of how that gets wrapped up. And listen, I'm not saying the MLB needs to find a machine to prevent a hurricane from happening. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is, before that game happened, before the first game in Atlanta happened, they should have made a decision. They should have said, "Oh, well, maybe we do a doubleheader on the first game, on the first day, and then we give them an off day. They go to Milwaukee, and then if that last game means anything, we will play it in Atlanta. We'll play it in a neutral site, something like that." But now we're looking at 2 games, and we're looking at playing, possibly, if the Mets get in, 4 games in the span of, 72 hours? I mean, it is a lot. I'm not talking about it in the sense of the Mets just being unlucky. The Mets, everybody is against the Mets. I'm just talking about this in any type of situation. This was not handled well. And whether you're talking about it from the Mets perspective, the Braves perspective, like we're talking about it with the matchups like you just did, or just the full on, I don't want to say scripting, but the way that it kind of lined it up to where the Padres didn't even give a shit today. It's not the best way to handle things, as to where you're just letting everything explode and then you're just like sprinkling little water to take out the fire. Like that, water can bring down fire, but you're going to need a lot of it, right? And for some reason, they just want to like sprinkle out these chips a little bit. And it just doesn't make any sense. And I really feel like it should have been handled a lot better. Listen, not everybody can predict the weather. Sometimes things are different. You can forecast the weather, of course. That's what meteorologists are for. But at the end of the day, they did not handle this correctly. And the only part The only party that that the only party that it costs is not the party that needed to handle this. And that's the main reason why people are pissed off. It has nothing to do with me saying, oh, well, it's just the Mets. They hate the Mets. The league hates the Mets. I don't care if that's true or not, because I don't care who hates us or not. How I feel about it is when you're talking about a natural disaster that could possibly come, making a decision less than 2 hours before that first game starts that could have been delayed is just absolutely ridiculous. Then you get, I mean, even if you want to talk about full-on rhythm, you get 2 days off. The Mets have a layover and everything. Yes, everybody gets rested. Then they come up flat in Milwaukee. I mean, and then they have to travel back. I mean, it's just a trickle-down effect because the MLB did not want to make a big boy decision. And that's how I feel about it. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add in this situation because there's tons of other craziness to go over. But again, it just was not handled well at all.
Yeah, I just don't like that neutral site. What didn't seem like it was really discussed because it's like hurricanes have happened before in the MLB season and teams get moved to other ballparks. Like it's happened multiple times in, the past decade or so. So I don't understand why that wasn't an option at all and just kind of avoid all this chaos because I think too, for me, if I'm MLB, I would want the Tuesday playoff series to like be as good as possible, like be a nice product to watch. I don't want to see a fully rested team and a zombie team, whether it's the Mets or Atlanta. I just don't think how that makes for good baseball as well. So, I mean, if you want to put on a good product where people actually want to tune in to see the game, and it's like, oh, well, if Atlanta makes it, we're not going to see the Cy Young winner, or it's like, oh, we're going to see a dead Mets bullpen or whatever. Like, it's not as appealing of a matchup to watch for a casual fan, for a fan who's maybe not a specific fan of the Padres or Brewers, Mets or Braves or Diamondbacks. So I just don't like that aspect of it either. If you're MLB, like you said, it's just there was multiple ways to avoid this, and they did none of them. So I think that's the other kind of thing too. And like you said, like with hurricane stuff like that, it wasn't just all of a sudden we got here on Tuesday and then we found out there's a hurricane tomorrow. Like, no, we knew this like going in before we even got there. So there was definitely some ways they could have went about this and they just did none of them. And like I've always said, I feel like they just give the home teams too much credit. They give them too much power. And I feel like if you're a league, you should kind of be in there and stand up. And this is just me. I'm not sure why the South would have the home series in a storm weather. You know what I mean? Like, if you know that this kind of scenario could happen to your postseason, why do you have your teams in the South have home games right at the end of the season? Just saying, because 2022 Braves had home field as well. Like, is there going to be a year where the Mets actually get home field at the end? Like, can we actually have that for once? But it's not something where it's like, okay, they get it one time and you get it one time. It just kind of happens. It's just, there's too many times where it's just like, oh, well, that's just how the schedule fell. Can't control that. Like, it just seems like, there's other ways you can go about this. Because I think the same thing can be said, like, let's say the Mets had to go to the Marlins or whatever, and it's like, oh, there's a storm there, or Houston. Like, you shouldn't do where hurricanes happen at the end of the season when you know it can mess up your playoff schedule. Because the other thing that annoys me is there was no consideration of delaying the wild card series. Like, let all this sort out and maybe we'll do the wild card series on like Wednesday or Thursday. It's like, nope, it's Tuesday. So if you know you were never going to move that, I feel like you could have done some different things with the schedule as far as end of season.
Yeah, I mean, is a possibility that they should also could have moved the wild card series as well. Like, they could have pushed that all the way down because, again, there is no traveling in these wild card series. All 3 games are played in one specific ballpark. So I feel like that is something that you also could have considered. There's different scenarios that they could have pieced these things together. And instead, like you said, you're getting kind of like this zombie product possibly tomorrow. Maybe the Mets in the first game just come out completely flat. It's possible because of all this traveling and these different time zones. I'm not going to blame it on jet lag, obviously, if they do lose, but it's the reality of the situation because they're going from Atlanta to Milwaukee, back to Atlanta, and maybe they go back to Milwaukee. I mean, if they even get to the playoffs. So it's a very wild, different ride that they're kind of setting up here. And I'm not saying that it's completely one-sided. I am saying that the league just doesn't seem to have a grasp on anything. They just seem to be very blind to the revenue that they can possibly get. And that's just not the best way to look at it. And I understand baseball is a business. We talk about this all the time. But when you're talking about the safety of fans and players, it's not really something you need to be messing with. And when we're talking about damaging the product, you're not going to get the revenue that you think you're going to get if you have a damaged product like you do. And the one more point I'm going to put up here is the way I can compare this is, yes, today is Sunday, so I might as well. Thursday Night Football. Just an awful display of the NFL product. Let's just say I personally think it should go, even though we all know it's all basically for money. We all know it's a more of opportunity for other streaming channels such as Amazon Prime that does it now to get more money and get their share of it. But Thursday Night Football, you have teams on short rests. They're not prepared. And it's just an awful product. I mean, that you really just see some awful, awful Thursday Night Football games. And that's kind of how I'm looking at it in the sense of less rest, even though the Mets and every team plays every day because it's a 162-game season. But I feel like you're really setting it up to where, okay, we don't want to damage the product and damage the revenue, but in the future, when we move it to this, we're going to still damage the product in some way because we couldn't make a goddamn decision about a natural disaster that we knew was coming for like a month. So at the end of the day, they just did not handle this thing correctly. Now, speaking of handling things at the bare minimum, let's talk about this actual Milwaukee series and, of course, the one game that they played in Atlanta. Now, let's just say that this was a series that we came in knowing with Atlanta that, again, we knew that this was going to all come down to it. Again, it still will come down to it. We're still in the process of it, and the Mets still have not clinched. But let's just say we started off this stretch of games in a very more familiar state. Let's just say that. Now, let's get into the full-on series rundown / plus game that was before it. September 24th, which was 5 days ago. I mean, this has been quite a turn of events. Of course, Mets Braves, Luis Severino would struggle through 4 innings, allowing 4 runs, walking 1, striking out 5. The Mets would have multiple defensive miscues that would open up the floodgates early. The Mets' only run would be driven in by a home run from Mark Vientos as part of a 2-hit game for him. Iglesias and Acuna would both get hits as well, but for the most part, the Mets offense would squander a few opportunities and go down quiet, losing in Atlanta 5-1. The next 2 games, as we said, would be postponed due to impending hurricane and rescheduled to a doubleheader on Monday, which of course we will get into eventually. And the Mets would fly to Milwaukee early to beat the Storm after 2 days off. Sean Manaea would struggle mightily, going just 3 2/3 innings, 5 earned runs, 1 unearned, walking 2, striking out just 1. The Mets would fight back in the third with a 2-run shot by Mark Vientos, and they would make it a 3-1 game. And they would make it a 3-run game in the 8th after a sac fly by Harrison Bader and a fielding error off the bat of JD Martinez. Lindor would have a 2-hit game in his return to the lineup. Iglesias would have a 2-hit game as well. Nimmo and Alonso would each get hits, but they could not string them together, falling to the Brewers 8-4 in Game 1. Game 2. Jose Quintana would start off good, but get knocked out in the 5th, allowing 2 earned runs, striking out 9, but walking 2. Iglesias and Marte would each get hits in this game, but that would be all for the Mets offense, as the rest of the lineup would go a combined 0 for 28 with 10 strikeouts and 0 walks. The only walk would also be to Iglesias, who got on base twice. Reed Garrett and Danny Young would make the situation even worse in the 8th inning as Garrett would surrender 4 earned runs in a walk 2, burying the Mets in a 6-0 shutout loss in Game 2. The Mets in desperate need of a win in Game 3, David Peterson would be marvelous. Seven scoreless innings with 8 strikeouts. The Mets would attack early on an RBI single by Nimmo in the first. Francisco Alvarez would add to the lead with an RBI single. Lindor would make it 3-0 after on an RBI single. You get a sac fly from Alvarez to make it 4-0, and Lindor would make it 5-0 on his 32nd home run of the year. Iglesias would extend his hitting streak to 20 games with a multi-hit game. Martinez would snap his 0-for-34 slump with a multi-hit game. Phil Maton would come in to pitch a scoreless 8th. Edwin Diaz would pitch a scoreless 9th with 3 strikeouts to beat the Brewers for the first time this season in shutout fashion, 5-0. The Mets now sit at 88-72, now in a virtual 3-way tie for the final 2 wildcard spots with a Braves loss and a Diamondbacks win that happened today. Again, like we have said, a mix of emotions throughout these last 4 games, throughout these last 6 days, since we last spoke, since we last did a podcast. The Brewers are a good team, and I think that that's the best way you can really put it. One thing that I would like to cue you in here, Frank, and then you can give your takeaways, is the first 2 games of this series, which it seemed like the Brewers were trying to win. And listen, I don't blame a team for trying to win no matter what their position is, because the Mets have to step up. But for those first 2 games, let's just say, before we talk about the bad, this looked like the exact same team that got swept by the Brewers at the beginning of the season. And that's the main takeaway that I would give to you. And any way you want to clue this thing in. And then, of course, the positive of finishing it off with finally beating this goddamn team that has tortured us.
Yeah, I think that definitely was one of the things I was looking at too, is that it's very rare where I feel like you start the season against one team and then end the season against the same team. Now, obviously, this isn't actually the Mets' last games because of the Lannisters, but the way it was originally scheduled was, and begin with Milwaukee, end with Milwaukee, and they're a team that's not in your division. So I just thought it was weird to begin with. But going into the season, Milwaukee did not have too high expectations. They lost Stearns, they lost Craig Counsell, their roster's a bunch of young players, not really sure what you're going to get. And then that opening series, they sweep us, and we're like, wow, are the Brewers good, or did the Mets just kind of stink? Like, what the heck did we just watch? They were running wild on us, kicking our butt, like something's going on here. Now we get to much later in the season where Milwaukee's turned out a very good season. They've clinched their division. They have 93 wins this year. And the Mets are much better now than they were at the beginning of the season. But you still saw some of those same problems like you're talking about with the stolen bases, where the Mets just cannot throw Milwaukee out. And that's a big issue. And Milwaukee, they kind of established an identity in the beginning of the season, and they stuck with it the whole way through, playing the small ball. I mean, how many times does their number 2 hitter bunt when the leadoff man gets on, which is a very, very old school thing. Like, the 2 hitter is the bunting guy, whereas nowadays usually like one of your best hitters is supposed to bat 2. So they really play the small ball game because they know they don't have stars that are going to overwhelm you with talent and power. So they hit the ball on the ground. They beat out infield singles. They don't chase. They steal bases. Like, they do all these little things, play great defense, amazing pitching. Like, they do it like in all the margins and like all the other ways, just playing good baseball without overwhelming you with talent. And it's worked really well from them. And it's a matchup that really does not favor the Mets, to be honest with you. I mean, I was glad to see Lindor finally steal a couple bases today, but overall, they showed in the season series, the speed department has really just kind of killed Milwaukee. And on the flip side for the Mets, today when Marte dropping down a couple bunts looking for hits, doesn't fall either time. And just a lot of these guys on this team, JD Martinez most specifically, if they hit the ball on the ground, they're not beating it out. So I think that you see that disparity of the athleticism. But, you know, the Mets were able to win today. But overall, like, if it does end up like Mets Brewers as the playoff series, it's not an easy series at all because,
Yeah.
like I said, the Brewers, they could pitch, they could play defense, they could run, like they do just basically everything. And then they have a Met killer certified in Rhys Hoskins. And they have just enough power with guys like William Contreras and Willie Adames. So they have like just what they need, and they're still a very tough team. So it shows that like that opening series was no fluke. Milwaukee's had a great season, give them a ton of credit. Some credit goes to Stearns, and we hope that one day we could get to that point just with a little more talent and proven names. But overall, they have a bunch of young guys who you didn't really hear begin the season, a bunch of rookies, and they kind of do it all. So I've been impressed by Milwaukee. I got nothing against them. I'm just glad the Mets were able to at least escape with one win.
Yeah, let me just say, I mean, when you look at this Milwaukee team, there's only one team that comes to mind, and that is that 2015 Royals team. That's the only thing that comes to mind when I think of where they just, on every single aspect of the game, they are pests. They just don't go away. Now, when you talk about pests, you really sometimes you talk about like how the Marlins continue to, destroy us at these very inopportune times. But then they seem to make like these mistakes that help bail the Mets out sometimes. When you talk to a Brewers team that is kind of a well-oiled machine, like they piece things together fairly well, and we talked about this being a Stearns finished product, and hopefully you get to that at one point. This is a really good team, and let's just say, not just from the depth standpoint, but they have just the entire team. It's all tools. It all is just tools that can continue to just, that continue to just fluctuate to the level of what this game is now with the bigger bases, the new still in base rules, the new pitch clock. That's kind of what they put into advantage, and I feel like that's the best thing that they kind of have done. And then you get to this final game where I'm like, okay, well, they've ran on you for 5 straight games now. They've played fantastic defense. We don't have the best defense, of course, but we do have some of these guys that can help you win in the margins. And of course, we have Francisco Lindor basically doing everything, and basically with the back injury kind of just killing himself to help this team get into the playoffs as of this current moment. But when you talk about how the Mets played this game, and even though they didn't have their best hitters, Milwaukee, in that, it seems like they kind of sagged off in that game, they beat Milwaukee at their own game today. They stole a bunch of bases. They even tried to bunt for hits, even though I don't think that Marte bunting for hits is automatic at any point. I'm not someone who likes bunting at all. I think it's just a free out. To be honest, when I saw Marte bunting, I literally I think I tweeted it out. I feel like he basically tried to bunt for a hit, and then he's like, oh yeah, wait, I have to run. Like, that's kind of how it looked, what Marte did twice in a row. And we all know how I feel about Marte and that kind of, selective hustle and that selective production that he likes to do ever since coming back from those injuries. But when it comes to this whole situation of Milwaukee, I don't want to face this team in the playoffs. I don't. I want to face San Diego. I would face the Dodgers. I would face the Phillies. I don't want to face Milwaukee. I just don't. I absolutely don't, because the main reason why I say this, the Mets struggle so much with things that completely land in the lap of the Brewers. These infield hits, these extra base runners, extending the inning, walking batters. Milwaukee is the only team that you could possibly play that will make you pay 99 times out of 100. We already know how the Braves are. We already know that the Dodgers are going to go as far as, their stars can carry them. We know that Philly is the ball go boom team. We know San Diego is San Diego, a very top-heavy team.
Slam Diego
as well. We know the situation with them. But when you talk about the Brewers, they do every little thing right. They do every single little thing right. And even though they did not have the star power to do it, we know that Christian Yelich is done for the season. Yes, they have Willie Adames and everything. They know how to situationally hit. And to be honest, I know that Milwaukee has had stagnant offense in the beginning. I would try to look at whoever their hitting coach is, to be honest. I'm not going to lie, like when it comes to situational hitting, because we know that the Milwaukee can bring power when they need to bring power. But like overall, like the situational type of hitting, it's just the complete opposite when it comes to the Mets. And we've talked about that before. Before we move on to this, caution coming in. I believe that's the dynasty, right? That's 3 in a row.
Yeah.
Coming in
and
with 149.
He put his whole bank account in. He didn't have $1.50 left around. He only $1.49. He's like, listen, this is all I got. Take it. Yeah. We appreciate it. I mean, back in my day, you could have got a lot of things with that, but now the $1.50, there's not much you can get now. It's
listen,
tough.
That's taxes are rough. Let's just say that. That's just how it is these days. But caution, thank you so much. That is now 3 times in a row he has donated a dollar amount. So thank you so much. Again, for those of you who feel the need to donate, please do. They are accepted. They're not required. But we really do appreciate that. Thank you so much, caution. Now, continuing on with this series, I do want to get to the pitching aspect of things. We saw in this stretch of games, not just this Milwaukee series in Atlanta, Severino, Manaea, and Quintana all not able to go distance. Quintana didn't pitch bad, but he did not give us distance. Manaea and Severino, we had 3 straight clunkers from our starting rotation, basically taking us out of the game before it even started. Now, we all know that the offense was a little stagnant. Of course, runners in scoring position could have been better, especially in that second game against Milwaukee. Let's just say that was horrendous. But let's just say you had the rotation fail you 3 games in a row. And then today, there was one man that answered the call. And we all know of how critical I've been of him. I've criticized him a lot. But what exactly can I say that's negative about this guy right now? David Peterson came through. David Peterson powered through. David Peterson gave us 7 scoreless innings. David Peterson actually composed himself. Did he look absolutely perfect? No. But at the end of the day, with contact management that we have gotten from him all season, he channeled it in this game. And what am I going to say? What am I actually going to say that isn't positive when it comes to David Peterson? Because he actually took some kind of initiative. He stepped up when it mattered. And I give major props to him for that. And I'm really, really happy that we kind of put the Mets, they kind of put themselves in this position where they kind of just they needed a wake-up call. They needed a wake-up call after these last 3 games that they seemed to just snooze through. And the fact that came from the starting pitching that really struggled those last 3 games, very, very impressive. So hats off to David Peterson. Fantastic outing, okay? And I really want to say that from the beginning to the end, it was not looking great in September for David Peterson. You had those 2 blow-ups, and he bounced back in a huge, huge way. And that is quite a way to end a great season that he has had. He has been one of the main reasons as to why this team has been in this position. You can't lie. I'm not saying that in any in any sort of, like, let's just say, I'm not saying that anyway sarcastically. I'm not saying that to troll at all. I'm actually saying that in one sincere. Now, we talked about this 2 years ago. And Frank talked about, at the end of the season, we talked about the most, I think this is one of like our first TikTok clips like ever. Frank told me, I said, who was the most underrated Met this season? And he said David Peterson. I was like, absolutely not. 100% absolutely not, especially with how the collective unit of what we got. No way. And he's talking about how he had a bunch of great old man wins to old man losses. You talk about 101 wins, a lot of them came from David Peterson. You told me that. And I'm like, this is bullshit. Come on. There's other guys out there that did well this season. But now, if you were to say that right now, I 100% would agree with you.
He got 10 wins this year, and his season doesn't start till June. For whatever reason, this guy pitches and they win ball games, which the Mets don't do all that often. So if he leads to winning, go for it. Because for whatever reason, they hit for him. I don't know what it is, but they like to have him win, and I like to win. So let him take the mound. And listen, this was the biggest game of his career. I mean, this was the most pressure he ever had, and he came through. Now, how much Milwaukee was trying, I'm not sure, but I don't care because we won the ball game. And one more point on Milwaukee. I mean, how would you feel if your team, like this team that they built, a bunch of guys never really heard of, not making much money, and it's like one of the big stars you have had to give everyone hugs because even though you love him, you know you can't afford to keep him. Like that's tough.
Yeah.
You know, it's really tough to navigate like that. Like you finally have your one star that you made the big trade for with Tampa Bay, and you can't keep the guy. Like that's tough. But you know what? It's just interesting because the Mets are 5-2 this year against San Diego and 1-5 against Milwaukee. So it seems like the Padres are actually the more favorable matchup, which you wouldn't think based off the records, based off the talent, but they just match up better with them. And thank you, Darren Rivera. I mean, we got it rolling today.
Yeah, we got $5 for
we
Darren
all can
Rivera
take off tomorrow. Let's go.
Saying keep up the stellar content creation. Thank you so much, Darren.
Stellar.
Obviously, let's give some hype ups from Darren. Let's say in the chat. I'm not trying to sound like a Twitch streamer here, but caution as well. Thank you to him. He's donated for 3 straight. So thank you guys so much. And again, this has been a fun season. Let's just say that we still got plenty of stuff coming out for you guys. And I think that, when you're talking about it from just overall the season and next episode, which will be, I don't know if you guys know this yet, but next episode is going to be another episode. We're going to have another episode tomorrow after this doubleheader to recap the season and hopefully preview the playoffs. And then we also, if they do get to the playoffs, we will be doing pre-games and post-games as well before every single game. So likely this is going to be the first stream of about 8 in the next 5 days if all goes well. So let's just say that you're going to see a lot of us. And then also, speaking of underrated and pieces that we're talking about, when you talk about like David Peterson, a lot of these pieces, everybody on the Mets roster of how they've contributed on this team, whenever this season does end, I will have a video coming out of basically ranking the Mets by performance throughout all 59 players that they have used this year. Some of them will be unranked. I will do it as like kind of a tier list video. And you're definitely going to see some good stuff about David Peterson, stuff that I did not expect to be doing. Let's just say that. But when we talk about this just overall series, those first 2 games, let's just say that this looked exactly like the team that lost and got swept at their own home ballpark at the beginning. And I really got a little bit scared. I'm not going to lie. I did get a little bit scared because not only did it look like, a mirror effect of what was happening at the beginning of the season, and this was supposed to be the end of the season? We're kind of lined up in like 50-50 scenario to play this team in the playoffs. And I was like, okay, well,
it's much higher than that. I'd say it's more like 80 to 90%.
Yeah, it probably will happen. The Mets will most likely have to win 2 games. I think the
Mets, like, as much as I want them to win, I don't see them sweeping the doubleheader and the Braves just getting eliminated.
Yeah.
I don't see that happening.
Yeah, so I don't think it's going to happen. So they're probably going to play Milwaukee. And I'm like sitting here, I'm like, okay, well, yeah, they're beating you up in the regular season. You get to the playoffs, it's a whole other different ball game. But just the way
maybe
that
2015
they play.
Cubs action. We were batting against the Cubs in the regular season, and then Daniel Murphy happened.
Yeah.
Who knows? Maybe an Iglesias or just somebody could have a crazy series, and then you never know.
You never know. Again, but we all know that their brand of baseball is something that can really take the Mets out, and it has for the first 5 games. But then I really hope that they stick to that game plan and be aggressive, just like the Brewers seem to do. You need to fire back in that way. I don't think the Mets attempted a single stolen base for those first 5 games that they played the Brewers.
Exactly. Yep.
And then Lindor takes off. You had, I think Nimmo stole as well.
Yes, he did.
Early on. I mean, take that initiative. I mean, really do, especially with, again, we talk about just not setting up the double play, which it kills every rally. No matter what, it will kill every single rally, especially with those big boppers coming up, like Pete Alonso, who's hit a lot of ground balls this year, and JD Martinez has hit a lot of ground balls. They need to take away that double play as much as they can. And that's going to more like dip into more of what I was thinking for my winner go home lineup that I do want to eventually get into in a second. But there is one piece, one little segment that we must do after these recaps that I have always done every single time. There was never some bad timing or anything. Never happened. No proof. Studs and duds. One player that played very well in this 4-game set. 4-game stretch, shall we say. One player that did not. There was quite a little bit of bad. There was some good. Let's just say you can put it in a lot of different envelopes. Let's just say that. Frank, I'll go to you with your stud of these 4 games that we are recapping. What do you think?
Yeah, I definitely think you got to give it to David Peterson. I mean, today was a big start for him. And I actually tweeted, I thought he should have pitched the 8th inning as well. I felt like he was in a good groove. He was at about 95 pitches, and I felt like, you're not really going to see him on short rest or anything like that. And I was surprised that Phil Maton came in after pitching an inning and 2/3 yesterday. Even though it was only 15 pitches, I thought Peterson was going well enough. You could have had him go 8. You have Maton, if you want to use him, go 9, save Diaz, and we can talk Diaz later because I know you probably have different thoughts about him resting a week. Because after the game, Mendoza was like, "Oh no, Diaz could go both games tomorrow, even though he threw 25 pitches." So, listen. I don't know what's going on there, but overall, I give props to Peterson. Because, listen, Severino didn't step up. Manaea didn't step up on Friday. And that was the thing. The Mets saved Manaea for Friday because they said we need to win these games. Manaea doesn't come through. Then you have Quintana, his scores inning streak. He did pretty good, not too great. Then the bullpen just totally falls apart. But for Pearson to step up with a game that they had to have was just absolutely huge.
Yeah, again, listen, David Peterson was the guy to step up when it seemed like our playoff hopes were starting to slide. Like, they really did look like they were going to slide. And even though the Diamondbacks made it a little bit easier for us by losing as well, and they have kind of fallen apart as to where they have to wait until Monday to get into the postseason as well, the Mets really dug themselves into quite a hole. Let's just say that. In the last 3 games, they were rough. And to have a starting pitcher actually come through for you, give you volume. And we were always talking about, they come up short. Some of these guys don't come through. You had the big guys come through. You hope that they did. And you had Luis Severino not pitch well. Sean Manaea did not pitch well. Jose Quintana got knocked out early, wasn't great. And then you have David Peterson step up and basically put the team on his back and say, yep, we're not done yet. We aren't done. And we're putting themselves in quite a position, because there was a lot of frustration throughout this entire series, because they're like, oh, well, all you got to do is just win one goddamn game. Like one, there's not really much that you have to do to clinch. And still, we're still on the ropes now. We still don't know if they're going to make it. And they've put themselves into this position. And that's the main reason why I don't like kind of blaming everybody else but the Mets. A lot of the problems that the Mets are facing right now, and a lot of the sweating bullets that a lot of Mets fans are seeing, could have been solved by the Mets winning maybe just one more game than they have this year. And, you know, the Mets needed to take advantage. They put themselves in the position where they can pull us back in, and then hopefully they don't break our heart again. But to give us some hope, David Peterson was the main architect. I would have put David Peterson as my stud as well. But also I'd love to give it to just I guess he's a hitting machine now. I think I did this last time. Jose Iglesias, 20-game hitting streak. Probably one of our best hitters with runners in scoring position. Just seriously, what a revelation this guy has been since he got here. Just everything. And hopefully he can come through as well, which I'm also hoping on regarding my lineup as well, talking about that. We'll get into that in a second. But also Mark Vientos seemed to be the only guy awake for those first 2 games of this stretch. He had a few calls not go his way in Milwaukee. And I do want to get into that.
Francisco Alvarez is another worthy mention.
Yeah,
he had a
Alvarez,
2-walk game. Should have been a 3-walk game because there were 5 balls. He got called out for strike 3.
We'll get into that.
He had 2 hits today and the sac fly. So I think you're definitely, and while having a bad back as well, and now he's got cramping in the legs. So I give him a lot of props for this series too.
All right. Well, I do want to talk about that umpiring game just for a second. But duds, there were quite a few. Let's just say that. Frank, I'll go right back to you.
I'm going to give it to the big man, Pete Alonso. I mean, he had 1 hit in this series, but no hits in Atlanta. Still too many strikeouts. Still swinging at the breaking balls away, right on right in the other batter's box. It's just like, you want to see improvement. I mean, obviously he's had his criticisms, and a lot of fans, including us, have had our complaints about the way he's performed with runners on base and things like that. And the numbers back that up. But when it's been going on for so long, like baseball is a long season, as we know, it goes on for months and months and months. And I still feel like I haven't seen improvement with some stuff with him this year. And that's the thing that really drives me nuts. I mean, we said it every episode. Oh, now would be a good time to wake up. Now would be a good time to wake up. It's just not going to happen. I'm done saying it because it's just not going to happen. That is how little confidence I have in him. I tweeted today, I give him the qualifying offer. If he says no, we wish you your best on your future endeavors. I just can't do this anymore. I mean, because it just bothers me that he says, oh, well, you know what? In 2022, it was our first time and we were pressing. So now we know what we're going to do this time around. I don't see it, Pete. What did you learn? Because you're telling me you learned something and I don't see any improvement from 2022. So where is it? So he could say whatever he wants, but if he's not actually contributing, then it doesn't matter. So I want to see him do something tomorrow, anything tomorrow, something productive. If he does that and actually has a good playoff series, okay, now we could have a contract discussion. But right now, if you can't come through when it matters most, why would I give you max money? That's just silly. That is just
exactly.
Silly.
Yeah, I've come to the point where, especially like for the entire spread of September, I'm just ignoring him. Like, I really have just continued to ignore, because I know that he is not going to come through. He's not going to do what we expect him to do, and they're just going to have to play around it like they have done all season, staying in playoff contention. And there's other things that I would love to talk about with Pete Alonso, and we're talking about like these big series against these teams that you have to beat, and he's obviously not coming through. And I continue to get in these constant arguments with people who really just constantly bring up the legacy of what's going on with Pete Alonso and how they need to keep him around. He's a homegrown player. First of all, I don't care right now. I don't care what happens with Pete Alonso. But in regards to that right now, if he's a homegrown player that they need to keep, if he is a cornerstone piece to this roster, show it to me right now. I don't give a shit about what you did in the past. I don't want to hear he is third all time in home runs on this franchise. He broke the rookie single season record. I don't want to hear any of that. He's a rookie of the year. I don't want to hear he's a 3-time All-Star. I don't care. No one gives a shit what Pete Alonso did in the past. No one cares, because you know what he did in the past? You know what this team did in the past? Nothing. Where is my ring? Where's my playoff series win? Where's my playoff appearances? Very seldom. They played 3 playoff games while they were here with Pete Alonso. That's not necessarily his fault, but it's the deepest core of the team. If he is a cornerstone member of this team, show me. Show me you are.
Do you even remember? Of course you remember. And how about September of 2019, his first year? He's having this incredible year. And then at the end, against Atlanta and everybody, he was nowhere to be found. I mean, it just seems like a common theme here where when the games matter the most, he shows up the least. And that is not a good reputation to have.
No.
If you're trying to pick out, like, okay, what guys am I keeping? What guys am I saying, you know what, let them see what they get on the market? If a guy can't come through in the big spots, then what good is he? Because it really just becomes an empty 30 and 100, 40 and 100. You could find that elsewhere. You really could.
And it's not like we've never seen him do this before.
Yeah. And in the past, he's gotten big hits. Don't get me wrong. Especially years prior, go-ahead hits, game-winning hits. Yes. But when the games matter the most in September, in October, and the Mets are in playoff races, we have not seen him come through. He just hasn't been good. So he needs to change the narrative. And if he could play well, you could do that. But if he continues like this, I just can't feel confident, because now this would be all 3 times when we were close, he was not a contributor.
Yeah, and again, we've seen him come through before. It's not like we've never seen him do that. And I will argue that in 2022, he got a hit in every single one of those games. He actually tried. He did homer, I think, in one of those games in the against the Padres. I don't know. I will argue that, of course. But again, that's 2 years ago. I don't give a shit what he did. I don't care.
That had to be the game where they killed the Padres, though. I mean, the other games,
exactly. That had to be the game.
And that's kind of what we've talked about, too.
Hit, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what we've talked about, too. Even this year, how many of his home runs have they already been winning?
Yeah.
I mean, I bet a lot.
It's just been all, like, meaningless. Exactly.
It's been rough. It really has.
I don't want to hear it. I just don't want to hear it. I don't care. I don't care anymore about his current situation. Right now, what are you going to do right now for this team? And what he is doing is nothing. Absolutely nothing. I have absolutely no sentimental attachment to what Pete Alonso is doing at this current moment, because this team just hasn't won anything. And it's a sad reality, because we all know how much of fan favorite Pete Alonso is. But if he actually does want to stay here, there is no feel bad for Pete Alonso. I feel like there's another detail that we also missed out. We offered him 7 years, $158 million in the offseason. He said no. So I don't want to hear there's a mutual want to keep this guy. There's a this, there's a that. He wants to stay, but he's just not doing well. And, the pressure's getting to him. He had the choice to stay, and he didn't. So at this point, can we call a spade a spade? I mean, what exactly can we say to give the benefit of the doubt to Pete as of right now? It's either you perform or you don't perform. And I really personally don't care. And I said this the last time we talked about, this could be his last home game. Guess what? We're in the middle of a playoff race. I actually couldn't care if this was his last day on earth. I really cannot. I cannot express how much the Mets and Pete Alonso's storyline right now is just constantly overbearing the actual situation here. If he can't perform under the pressure of a contract year, then why the hell would I pay him long term? Where we're hoping to be a sustainable winner. And it's not like we've never seen him come through in those ways before. But right now, to me, every single thing that we're talking about and what Pete Alonso has done here, it's just a gimmick to me. Show me the damn results. I don't care. I do not care what you have done in the past. Right now is what matters. And that's the main goal as to what we're talking about with the whole team right now. Right now is what matters. You have 2 games that are huge. Can Pete Alonso come up big? I'm not confident that he can. Now, obviously, this is more of a rant in the middle of studs and duds, and I apologize for that. I'll get to my dud, and I feel like it's kind of co-duds here in Manaea and Severino, kind of just, I don't know, kind of emulating Scherzer and Bassett, what they did at the end of the season. Like, and I hate to put this in that type of perspective, but that was basically Scherzer and Bassett at the end of the season. Like, they just didn't show up. They didn't even give us a chance.
Yeah, and I think for Severino, he has a chance tomorrow where it's like if he has 2 straight really bad starts against the Braves that cost the Mets whether they make it or not make it, he's another one where I'm like, can I give him a nice extension? I don't know. If you're not coming through in the big games, it just kind of eliminates everything you did all year.
It erases everything for me. And this was the same thing that I was talking about with Scherzer 2 years ago. 2022. Max Scherzer was magnificent in the regular season. He was great. We talked about his leadership in the clubhouse and you know, kind of changing the culture as to where big free agents come here. He stepped on that mound in Atlanta and in San Diego. He didn't come through, so I don't give a shit. Like that 2022 Max Scherzer, it all goes out the window. Where were you when I needed you? He was nowhere to be found. Oh, no. He was there. Never mind. Correction. He was there. He gave up 7 runs to the Padres on our home field. And he blew up against the Braves, a team we had to beat. So I'm talking about when are you going to come through when it actually matters? And it's not just a Pete standard right now. We're also talking about Luis Severino and Sean Manaea, who are both most likely playing for contracts too. It's another thing we haven't talked about too.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing too, is that so for Manaea, his first start is bad. Let's say the Mets get in and he has a bad start against the Padres. Same thing. I was like, oh, here's a guy maybe I'm willing to give a good contract. Now I'm like, I'm not so sure. Like, I'll give him a fair offer, but if somebody overpays him, I'm not going to like top that. I'll be like, okay, fine. You know, I mean, because again, this is kind of where that whole like find your next Manaea, find your next Severino thing kind of plays into, because when we signed both of them, we weren't like throwing a parade. We were like, okay, we'll give this a shot. Like, these guys have had some success in their careers, maybe not as much recently, but they've been good pitchers before. But we didn't have high expectations for them on these 1-year deals, so to speak. Manaea has the opt-out. So I feel like Stearns could find another set of pitchers where he's like, okay, 1-year deals, guys have been good in the past, let's see what happens. Like, you find your next version. I mean, that's what the really great organizations do. They're not so reliant on like, oh, well, if we lose this guy, it's over. I mean, in other sports,
we're done.
Like those compensation picks, like they play off big time. Like, oh, we let a pass rusher go to another team, let's draft another pass rusher, and we develop them. Like, that's kind of what you want to see here, is that, you know, you give out always qualifying offers, they don't take it, and we'll see how the first couple of drafts go with the Mets too. I mean, that's kind of one of the other things I want to see, is because these guys that Milwaukee was using, these rookies, like Stearns brought those guys in, like he had something to do with that, and now you're seeing it. So let him draft these guys and see what happens, so you
Yeah.
could have a bunch of guys you never heard of and they're all productive players for you while being a big market team. And I could buy a Santander and I could buy a Kodai Senga and maybe whoever else.
Yeah.
Like, you're able to do the best of both worlds in that kind of sense. So I'm just I feel like I have faith that they could find another set of veteran starters if it doesn't work out. But no matter what, I also get that compensation pick, and I have a
Yeah.
kind of like something where it hangs over their head, like, oh, do I want to give up a draft pick for Severino? You kind of trap those
Yeah.
other teams as well. So I kind of look at like a Stroman
Yeah.
situation where he took the qualifying offer, and then whatever happened. But I feel like you always kind of have that at your disposal too.
I always want to have that type of flexibility, especially when it comes to the pitching staff. It either should be from 1 to 2 year deals or in-house pieces, which hopefully we start to see some of the prospects come up here. We know that Brandon Sproat is someone that we have our eye on for next year as well. Maybe a sprinkle in Tidwell. I know that Tidwell has struggled this year, of course. We've had some other things with pitching prospects. Again, that's a different story. But when you talk about it from the rotation, with how much it gets hurt, with how much consistency, which with how much volume concerns that you get from starters throughout an entire 162 game season, you can't rely on giving these long-term deals to pitchers. Like when it comes to somebody like Severino, we've talked about this before, and this is a whole different topic. I am not really looking to pay him. I'm really not looking to keep him. The only thing that will probably help me would actually direct me to keeping him, and this probably would play into it going forward, but if we see some kind of like Jordan Montgomery type of run in the postseason from Luis Severino, that's the only way that I probably keep him. Now, Manaea is a different story.
And
Because
how's that contract looking so far?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean. But like when you're looking at it from, the perspective with, Manaea, there's a different story with like the stability and everything of a guy that you want in the middle of your rotation. But I would say that they got to come through, and the players that come through get paid in the off season. I mean, they do. We've seen it before. Guys have incredible playoff runs, and then they get this contract that nobody really expects. I mean, I do think that no matter what, like when you're talking about free agency, and this is more of just like a rambling on, but again, we'll probably go over the 2 hour mark here because we got a lot to talk about no matter what. But I do think that whoever it is, Jose Iglesias is going to get a good buck. Let's just see. He's going to get something. I mean, he's 34 years old, but again, there's going to be something there. I mean, it's all about, what you do lately, how your stock is on the market. And when you're talking about these free agents like Pete Alonso, it's a different story. Let's just say that. Now, I do want to talk about for a second what happened in Milwaukee with the umpiring crew. Let's not forget Ramon DeJesus. I think that the facts that we can point out here is that he was also the umpire that threw out Jorge Lopez in the whole glove tossing into the stand debacle that kind of changed our entire season. So it was kind of poetic for our season-defying stuff to go down to Ramon DeJesus basically just having a really rough rough game behind the plate. I personally don't think that overall, when you're talking about the consistency, I think that it was kind of half and half, of course. I think that the overall amount of calls that he missed wasn't as drastic as people think it was. I think that it's just the fact that the significance of the calls were the main reason as to why he got so much heat for it. And there were a lot of game-defying calls that he did make, including, we all know, in the case of with Francisco Alvarez, which seemed to be the defying game with he was being the tying run at the plate, and he would have made the bases loaded. we all know that that probably would have impacted the game, and maybe the Mets could have tied it. Who knows? Because the pitcher was struggling, they had him on the ropes, but he ended up getting punched out. You had Carlos Mendoza go out there and get ejected. I've never seen him more angry ever. And I mean, I've seen this guy. I've seen this guy bring the passion, and I know that a lot of people do like Mendoza for that reason, and so do I. I've never seen him that mad before in my life, and I'm glad that he was that mad because he knows what the significance was. And, you know, I love to see that type of fire from my manager, especially a New York manager. I mean, that's the type of fire you want. I would not have blamed him, if he said something completely out of line, in that motion. But what I really did not like, and you can see, from that, and I'll toss it over to you. You can see in the video, Ramon DeJesus basically just making the situation even worse in terms of the arguing, where he's kind of chesting up to Carlos Mendoza and basically getting in his face and forcing back at him. You also had Francisco Lindor earlier in the game kind of just... I mean, it looked like he was questioning some kind of call. He wasn't questioning it, but you also had like Ramon DeJesus like kind of come at him and like lean towards him. And it just seemed like this guy, I mean, he just seems like a sensitive bitch, just known man. But it's like, when you're an umpire, you're supposed to settle down the situation. That's not what you're supposed to be doing. And at the end of the day, you can say that the umpires costed them the game. If you want to do that, go ahead. The Mets still didn't play well. I don't like blaming umpires, but that was a whole other level of display of like just incompetence on the field. Let's just say that. And I don't know what you saw, Frank, but I think that at the end of the day, that was brutal. That was just brutal. And it sucks because we already know they're not going to be held accountable because that's just how it is.
Yeah, I think there's a few things here. So number one, we got to kind of go in chronological order. We have to go all the way back to end of May. Jorge Lopez ejection on the check swing. He feels like he didn't say anything. He gets thrown out, throws the glove into the crowd. The umpire was one Roman DeJesus, the third base umpire, the one that threw Jorge Lopez out of the game for basically saying nothing. So we already had a history with him before this game. And then you saw also in the first inning, Manaea maybe getting squeezed a little bit. That led to the bases becoming loaded, which then led to the Rhys Hoskins grand slam. Now, maybe if one or two of those pitches go Manaea's way, you have a different start to the ball game. You have a much closer game. And then in that at bat with Francisco Alvarez, you had first pitch was definitely a ball outside, and the last pitch was definitely a ball down. So he missed two calls on two completely different parts of the strike zone. And what's annoying is that it's so clear to everybody who watches. You pull up the picture and you could just see that he's way off on both of those calls. But Mendoza points out that these calls are wrong, and there's proof when you look at the picture. And he gets thrown out of the game, but there is no punishment, there's no penalty for those calls being wrong. And for me, this, umpire scorecard that's on Twitter that gets posted the next day, they say that these are the most impactful calls in the game. And none of those calls I mentioned are on there. And I found it so weird that two of the calls that are on here are about an Adam Ottavino at bat in the seventh inning, which led to no runs being scored, compared to the 4 runs in the first inning and the potential of a few runs for the Mets when Alvarez was up. So I wonder if the people who are like, oh, well, just look at the scorecard, he wasn't that bad. I wonder if this is altered at all. Because there is just literally no way you could reason that the Ottavino at-bats are more impactful than what happened in the first inning and what happened in the Alvarez at-bat. And I just don't understand how it's like the umpire is clearly wrong. And this happens in kind of all sports. Like, basketball has like the last 2-minute report where they're like, oh, this call was wrong. It should have been blah, blah, blah. And nothing ever comes out of that. Like, there's no, well, now this team gets the win, or now this referee, whatever. Like, nothing comes out of that. So I don't know if the Mets want to maybe file a grievance against this umpire, because there's now two different situations where we've had really bad things happen with him, to be like, listen, you can't call our games anymore because you have a vendetta against us. Because that should have been that should have been the decision
because
what else happens? Because I don't know if this umpire scorecard's account is trying to protect him, that made him, he was worse than what we actually saw. I don't know. I don't know if there's any bias that's involved in it, but I just don't understand how it's like, what, right or wrong, like, those are clearly wrong calls, and Mendoza's the one that gets punished, and there's just nothing for the umpire. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, it is possible that maybe they do send like this, they try to just, like, I mean, they try to shorten things out in a different way in Milwaukee. When you think about it, like, the punishment should have been that he's not allowed to be the umpire for the Mets games, but I feel like that probably would have been, like, at the end of the day.
And one more thing.
Yeah.
If a manager chests up an umpire, that's an automatic suspension.
Yeah.
Automatic. But when the umpire does it to a manager, there is absolutely nothing. There is no suspension, no anything. That's not right. That is not right. No matter what manager it is, no matter what players, what team it is, that is not right.
And I talk about that all the time. And again, like, it really has nothing to do with, arguing the balls and strikes, because I have never been one to really blame umpires when it comes to the balls and strikes because of how pitches move these days. And talking about pitch tunneling and how this was in the strike zone at one point and now it's not, but it nicked the outside corner. Maybe it was a little bit outside, but it's borderline. It's a borderline call because it was in the strike zone. Some of these pitches he was calling were never in the strike zone to begin with. And when you're talking about, like, these most impact calls on that scorecard, I will tell you firsthand that it's all based on run expectancy. So it has absolutely nothing to do with runs actually coming across, which we talk about, like, all of these like these negative and positive metrics when we talk about that of the play going on with some of these defensive metrics like defensive runs saved. It's all more run expectancy of the actual pitch, and not if it's a called strike or a called ball. That's the main reason why they said it's the most impactful. It has absolutely nothing to do with game. That's the problem. It's run expectancy, and it's not, and it's game expectancy. Those are two different things. And that's the main reason as to why I take expected run value and I just toss it out. Like, I don't even look at that because I just think it's complete bullshit. Because it just does not, like, feed into actually what happens to the game. It really just kind of calls into, like, the actual player and the actual situation of just taking things away. It's basically the equivalent of when Pete Alonso homers down 6-0. Like, it just has absolutely no meaning to it. But in that certain play, eliminating the whole game in general, it does have an impactful meaning. It's just not a good way to measure it. And I wish that they kind of looked at it from actual impactful plays and not impactful pitches. But that's just the way that they do the umpire scorecard. It's a good way. Like, umpire scorecard does a really good job with it. But again, like, the expected run value stuff, it's not good. It really isn't. I just like the strict run value because that really more plays into the play and not the pitch. So that's the main reason as to why they do that. It's stupid. I don't like the way that they do that, but they do the expectancy mainly because of expectancy mainly because of, like, I think it's like just the run favors, like the run in favor of other teams, because there's no real way to measure it with, the actual run value. So again, these are different types of metrics that I could possibly go on for hours and hours on, but there's no time. But run expectancy, game expectancy, play expectancy, it's just, they're different things and they shouldn't be treated as such. That's basically it. So for me to defend the analytics people, there's the explanation of why I think it's stupid as well.
Yeah, and I think one more thing, that this has kind of been my thing with umpires. If you call something that I believe is not the correct call, but you're consistent with that, I'm like, okay, that's
Yeah.
your strike zone, and I'll let it go. We just have to change our approach. But for Francisco Alvarez, who is the catcher for the Mets, you would think he, by the middle of the game, knows what the strike zone is
Yeah.
and knows what calls he's getting and not getting. So
I
stuff like that
was
also makes it look one-sided.
I
And
was
and, and
so
if anyone would
surprised.
know what is a strike and is a strike, it should be Alvarez.
I'll tell you, I was so surprised that he didn't get tossed because he slammed his
He
helmet.
slammed the helmet
so
down.
pissed.
Yeah.
Maybe it was Mendoza who walked in front of him before Ramon de Jesus saw it. But to be
Alvarez
honest,
did a good job of kind of just going back to the dugout because a lot of players would turn around and keep going. He threw the helmet down, said some stuff, but he just kept walking towards the dugout.
Yeah, I mean, he was visibly he was upset. Like he definitely was. I think that at the end of the day, when you talk about it with, in the sense of with Alvarez in that situation where he is the catcher and he takes it a little bit more personally of getting these calls, we know that Francisco Alvarez also takes an emphasis on framing pitches a little bit more than he should with blocking, which I need to see him get better on next year. Different story.
Maybe robot umpires, he'll just focus on
maybe
blocking.
it does.
Yeah, I don't know if that's
because
it could be that that's what they're telling him. They could say like, if we have to pick between the two, we want you to focus on the framing. But for me, I'd say base or empty, focus on framing, runners on. Block.
Yeah.
That's
a different thing. Different topic. Let's just say that. And hopefully we also have pitchers that don't bounce things 15 feet in front of the plate every single goddamn pitch and walk everyone. Maybe that will help a little bit more. But when it comes to this whole situation with a catcher and that being impacted, it just makes it look bad. And the fact that you had Francisco Alvarez react the way and lucky to stay in that game because he probably should have been tossed for the way that, he reacted. He didn't go in his face like Carlos Mendoza did, like a manager should. But when it comes to Francisco Alvarez, the fact that we had him in the post game, also kind of distressed from the whole back situation of exiting the game, he basically said, okay, well, the next day I'm going to apologize to him. I shouldn't have reacted that way. They're trying to do their jobs. And the fact that you get no repercussions of anything that happens with the umpire, it's bad. And the one thing that I can't stand with umpires, like I said, with the balls and strikes, some things are borderline. Some are just clear calls. I've never seen a real there's with pitch, like how I feel with pitch tunneling and how pitching is these days. I understand most of it where it's borderline and sometimes they frame it. It happens, But when you're talking about like these clear-cut points, and then you make a mistake that you're like, okay, yeah, most likely that's not right. It was never in the strike zone, and then you kind of own up to it and chest up to the manager, and basically just abuse your power. I can't stand of umpires that just abuse their power because they know they have it, and they know that they know that there's going to be no repercussions for them because constantly we've seen that. And we've talked about this with umpires again, where the umpire feels like, the fans came to see them. We've seen that happen plenty of times with the Mets this year, with the Sicky stuff with Edwin Diaz, with Jorge Lopez and all that stuff. Not to mention, let's not forget Phil Cuzzi and that whole thing last year with Max Scherzer. We had that thing with Drew Smith as well. Who was the other sticky guy that got? Who was the other sticky substance that got tossed out this year? I mean, we've had tons of instances where it was basically just an umpire show and everybody was coming to see it. And you have like the Edwin Diaz situation, you had a primetime game. People wanted to see Edwin Diaz pitch. And they're like, nope. You did something that you always do, but you know what? I said it was too sticky because I said so. This is my authority. I'm putting my foot down. I'm asserting my dominance here. Like, that's ridiculous. It's just absolutely a joke. And I don't like how, abusing your power in that way because you know that you can. And it's just it's aggravating when you see things like that. And listen, these umpires are humans. Maybe they're not. Who knows? Maybe that's a whole different conspiracy. But these umpires are humans. They make these mistakes. And I'm like, okay, well, this is the main reason why I don't argue this. I always see people on Twitter saying, oh, these umpires hate the Mets. Different way. With the replay system, different thing. But when it comes to the balls and strikes, there's a certainty of consistency. There's a certainty of just getting the call right that, like, you hope to see. Like, you want the game to be fair. Would you love for all these calls to go your way? Absolutely. But when you're talking about watching a baseball game and keeping things fluid in this game, you need there to be a standard that gets set, and it doesn't seem like there is one. Especially with, like, the full-on punishments for umpires screwing up a call or just the sticky stuff in general. I mean, there's tons of things where you're like, there's not even a regulation. It's all just with the umpires because I said so. At the end of the day, we've had so many of these kinds of screw-ups that you feel like the umpires decide who wins the World Series these days. Like, that's how it feels sometimes. I don't know how that feels because, again, it's a 162-game season. But, like, when you can make a situation subside and you're making it even worse the way that Ron DeJesus did, I mean, there's tons of shots and tons of videos and tons of angles of him basically instigating even more because I said so. I mean, that it just can't happen. There's no room for that in baseball of just like this hierarchy crap. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, and one of the things I wonder is how many times has the opposing manager against the Mets been ejected? I feel like there hasn't been many. I'd really have to think about it because off the top of my head, I can't think of much. And even for Mendoza, he's a guy that's gotten thrown out a few times, but he has a pretty good temper, I'd say, where like he'll say something when there's a bad call. He'll be like, "Oh, come on, that was not right." But he has like a cutoff where he's like, "Okay, this is too much." Like eventually, like if they keep doing it, he's coming out there. Like he tries to be patient, not get thrown out, and like he tries to like let it play out.
He gives him a leash.
But once it gets out of hand, he goes out there. He's like, "Okay, this is just craziness." So I wonder like how many times opposing managers have been thrown out against the Mets because if we want to keep this whole like, oh, they're out against the Mets, they have a vendetta against them. I just can't think of too many going the other way, particularly managers that got thrown out against New York. So it's a weird situation, but I think overall, like, did it decide the game? You lost 6-0, probably not, but it didn't help. And I just think overall that no matter how many, let's say it was more wrong calls that he got, it doesn't mean anything in the end. You know what I mean? Like just nothing matters. Like it just is what it is. And that's kind of frustrating that like there's no penalty for the umpires.
Yeah, again, and I think that, just to prevent it from happening again, like we've talked about it with the MLB, with the whole hurricane situation, and preventing, these problems from happening again, it always seems like it's just too late. It always seems like it's just too late to, make like these types of calls because it's already gotten out of hand. And, we're talking about this Ricardo coming in and saying this, basically just the full-on fact that, we're talking about the umps for about 20 minutes on this show during a playoff race, may I add as well, that he didn't even say. It means it's a problem, and it is a problem. It absolutely is, Because I think that it's a problem in baseball that, again, when you're talking about it, even from the sense of how they handled it in Atlanta, it's ruining the product. It just is ruining the product. And I feel like at the end of when, in general, when it comes to umpires, this is the harsh reality because it's apparently they like to play hardball here. No one's here to see you. No one is here to see you. No one cares about you. Like, seriously. And I mean that in the nicest way possible. I'm sure some of these umpires are great guys in general. We came to see the players play. We did not see I'm buying a ticket to see the umps. Has anybody ever said that? No. No one has ever said that in their lives. If they did, they're probably living like, I don't know, 15 feet underground and under a rock. Like, that's how it is with umpires. No one's here to see you, man. No one is here to see you. They want to see a baseball game. They want to see their favorite players, the stars of this game, play. It's just damaging the product when you don't do anything about it. Umpires just need to be held accountable. I mean, we could go on and on about this, and when the next time that this happens, we'll be talking about it again. But speaking of talking about things that are very, very important right now, the Mets are going back to Atlanta. We talked about it last time of the make or break series. Well, we still got 2 games to go. And this is basically the Mets need to win 1, and they're in. It's that simple. But before we preview this doubleheader, I want to talk about what we would do. If we were the manager, we had the lineup card. The Mets have quite the flexibility to make these moves. They have depth on this roster where you can move pieces around. And me and Frank each made our own winner go home lineups. And you guys can let us know which ones you like better as well. We're going to explain the certain combinations, how we would utilize these things. Frank, I'll go to you first of your winner go home lineup that you would prefer the Mets to give. I know that you and me also kind of took this into consideration if Schwellenbach was pitching or Sale was pitching. I kind of did it a little bit more towards Sale, somewhat towards Schwellenbach. Like, I kind of balanced it out a little bit of riding the hot hand as well. But I'd like to see you kind of like tell me what you would do with your lineup, kind of how you're configuring it. So I'm going to pop it up on the screen. And for those of you who know the reference, let us know if you know the reference. But in this scenario, the fate of the universe is on the line. Laser beam pointing down. Okay. So, Frank, this is the lineup that you said that you would put out here in a winner-go-home scenario. If you want to dupe it out and, kind of show the reasoning of what you would do, let me know.
Yeah, so originally I was thinking of having Lindor DH and have Acuna play shortstop, but after seeing how well Lindor played today at shortstop, I feel like, okay, you know what? His health is good enough to where we could have him out there. I put Jose Iglesias up in that 2 hole because with that 20-game hitting streak, he's been batting around 400 since that happened. I feel like he needs to be at the top, getting on base, setting things up for the middle of the lineup. Now, when the Mets actually faced Schwellenbach this past week, they did not have Iglesias bat second. But then in this Milwaukee series, we've seen Iglesias bat second. They actually had him I don't think he even played in the Schwellenbach game. It looks like, did he? I don't even know where he batted, but he batted much longer in the lineup. But anyways, I had Nimmo third because just to break up a little bit with the lefty, and Nimmo, I wouldn't put him like clear back. I feel like 3 is kind of my cutoff. Mark Vientos, he had the home run against Schwellenbach. So again, if Lindor's doing his thing getting on, Iglesias doing his thing getting on, when Vientos could potentially hit the home run, I want it to be with runners on base. You want to maximize that power, have guys on in front of him. So I have Vientos there. Alonso is just kind of there by default. I mean, you don't really have anyone else that's going to play first base. If Andy Vientos, then who's going to play third. So you're kind of stuck there. I went with Winker at DH. I didn't love it. There was a couple things I was thinking about here. Now, I don't care that JD Martinez hit the double off of the third base bag and that he had another hit later on. They both were on the ground, and to me, if JD Martinez hits the ball on the ground, it might as well not be a hit because it's a double play. So I didn't like that at all. I felt like Schwellenbach is one of these guys that is a horrible matchup for JD Martinez and so many of these Mets right-handed hitters with his reliance on the breaking ball going away. I feel like he was one of those first guys that really exploited the flaws in a lot of these Mets right-handed hitters. And the Mets are just lacking lefties. I feel like I just had to put one of them out there. Winker has not been swinging a good bat at all lately either, but I feel like he gives me a chance. Now, I don't love the matchup of Marte against Schwellenbach with what I talked about, those breaking balls breaking away. But on the flip side, I didn't want Winker playing the outfield. So I said, you know what? I'm going to take the trade off, at least have, even though Marte's not great defensively, he's better than Winker. I said in the Atlanta field, the way right field plays, let me have Marte out there instead of Winker. I think defense not mattering. I would have liked Winker out there, right? And then maybe I could have done my Acuna out there and Lindor, but I said we'll just let that go. Alvarez, for obvious reasons, he's been swinging a good bat. And then Taylor, I trust him more than Bader right now. Taylor's been hitting the ball hard constantly. He's had a good month. Bader, it's been a struggle. So that was just kind of what I went with. I wish the Mets had more left-handed options. I feel like they'd really need it for a guy like Schwellenbach. But overall, this is kind of what I decided. And, we'll see. I mean, it's not too far off from the lineup they've been using lately. But I just think overall, this is something that was appealing to me when I saw it. They had Iglesias lead off the first time they faced Schwellenbach because Lindor was not available. So now they have Francisco this time, and he had a huge game today. So you hope that maybe just having him set things by example, like the way he's done all year, could really be what kind of breaks the mold against Schwellenbach and actually gets them to break through.
Yeah, I mean, I see kind of the angle that you're kind of going at this with, kind of like balancing it out with the hitting matchups, because we already know that the offense has kind of been a little bit stagnant in terms of just pretty much in these winner go home games. I mean, these critical games, we've seen the offense just not really show up, and then the pitching would just make like one mistake and they would just be dead on impact. So, but with mine, I'm kind of putting it with all situations at hand. Now, I know that there's going to be matchups that they kind of induce this. I really hope that Schwellenbach, being a right-handed pitcher, does not put Eddie Alvarez in the equation. Hopefully that doesn't happen, which I don't think will happen, but I'm just saying we've seen him start before. With me, in terms of Schwellenbach, and then also just the overall that we have gotten from Mark Vientos against left-handed hitters, which has been nearly left-handed pitchers, which has been nearly just money. I'm putting Mark Vientos in the 2-hole. The main reason why I got Lindor at DH, the Mets don't have an off day. They just don't. They don't have any rest whatsoever. There's going to be back-to-back. There's going to be 2 games tomorrow. They need to get some kind of rest for Francisco Lindor to get that back at full 100% for the playoffs if that happens. I understand that's kind of trying to be too many steps ahead and too many steps behind, but seeing Lindor play the way that he did today, I just need to see him rest from the field just for one game. If they want to do that for the second game and make him play shortstop, that is fine. But I just need them to give him just one more day or one more game of rest from shortstop to get 100%. Because when he was running the bases today, yes, it seemed like he was able to do that, but he was definitely putting his body on the line today. And I just need him to rest just one more. Brandon Nimmo, I'm putting him in the 3-hole, just like you have, mainly because I just think that when you talk about the full-on situational hitting, it's just something that that Brandon Nimmo has still been able to thrive at, even regardless of his struggles in the second half. Now, when you're talking about Pete Alonso, I just seriously have him there because that's pretty much it. The main reason I have Jose Iglesias batting 5th is because of just the situational struggles that they have had, especially recently in these last few games, and how it's kind of carried over to Milwaukee. Jose Iglesias has been the best hitter situationally for this team. He's been incredible with runners in scoring position, and I think that that's the best way to just kind of put it there. And also with situational hitting, Francisco Alvarez has been good as well. The main reason as to why I have Tyrone Taylor, Harrison Bader out there is because I am putting defense in as my priority towards the bottom half of the lineup, even though you know that they can also provide offensively in a pinch. Every single time when I go back to Atlanta, I instantly think of defensive miscues in the outfield when it comes to that. And when you're talking about the overall defense, we have seen Bader and Taylor come through many, many times defensively for them in these tight situations. Not to mention, remember that Tyrone Taylor amazing catch in Atlanta early on this year that we thought that was going out because the SNY camera crew was, I don't know, completely drunk. But I'm not just talking about full-on moments or plays. I'm just talking about the full-on defense. And I don't trust Starling Marte at all out there in the outfield. I know he's looked a little bit better since coming out injury. And I also just don't trust Starling Marte to play either of these games because I think that his work ethic is disgusting and he basically just plays whenever he wants to. And this is not a time to be selective. They need to win. And I pretty much just banished him to the bench in my reality. Luis Angel Acuna has played a great shortstop. He's been good offensively. He slowed down a little bit in this Milwaukee series, but it was a little bit stagnant. He did not get that many reps. We had those off days. But that's the type of player that I want to kind of set up the big boys, someone who also can steal bases as well. I want to see him display some of the speed. We've talked about that before. But that's the kind of how I would do with these lineups. I don't know how you would kind of configure this, what your opinions are on this, any way that you would do this, Frank. I don't know if you have any ways that you would switch this. I know that you wouldn't put Harrison Bader in here. But when it comes to the full-on defensive unit, I just have so much PTSD of just defensive screw-ups in Atlanta, leading to.
No, I really like what you said about the doubleheader aspect of it and Lindor's health. I feel like, honestly, like my lamp on the left is Schwellenbach and your lamp on the right is Sale. Like I feel like I could see myself going with something pretty similar. Again, I just maybe move Iglesias up and Alonso down and all that, just like kind of move that around a little bit. But as far as the personnel, I agree with it for the most part. And like we said, I don't see Marte playing both games either, you know? So I could see something where you want Bader, hopefully he runs into one. And you actually have some defense because runs are going to be at a premium. So you don't want to just give any runs as a gift when you're facing Sale. There is something to be said for that. So I think overall, I could see that. One of the other things to factor too is like, does Alvarez catch both these games? Maybe not, especially if he had cramping at the end. So we have to factor Torrens gets one of these as well. So that's something to also consider. Like, and the other thing to go along with that is, do you do Torrens Bader? Or do you kind of split those guys? Well, like, do you want two like non-bats and just glove first guys in at the same time? So it kind of depends. Like if you win the first game and you can kind of change some things around, but you know there are like some additional things to consider as far as like you said, no runs could be a premium having that defense out there. But it's a good point that you know that Lindor maybe needs to DH one of those and that Marte doesn't do both. Alvarez probably doesn't do both, and you know Winker's not facing Sale, so that's where that Acuna at short and Lindor DH would really stand out to me.
All right, well, let's actually get into this series that we have coming up, which is do or die. The Mets cannot lose both games. We know the scenarios, which we will get into as well, but of course we got to talk about these pitching matchups. In these probables, Tyler McGill has been announced as the Game 1 starter, which will be at 1:10 tomorrow. He will go up against the man who has dominated us twice already in Spencer Schwellenbach. It's a great name. It is a great name, but he's annoying how he has faced us. And that will be at 1 o'clock, and we don't know what is going to be the start time afterwards. But Game 2 will most likely be Luis Severino versus Chris Sale. It looks like if the Braves win Game 1, they won't put out Chris Sale, so that probably will be a little bit of an advantage for the Mets. Again, we just need the Mets to split in this one, and obviously in all the other details, we'll switch over to the clinching scenarios here. Basically, it's very, very simple. The Mets have a magic number of 1. They need to win one game to get in. They can't have anybody else lose because the only team that needed to lose was the Diamondbacks, and they finished their season today and won. You have the Mets at 88 and 72. The Braves are at 88 and 72 as well. The D-backs finished their season at 89 and 73. The Mets and Braves both have the tiebreaker over the D-backs, and the Braves currently lead the season series over the Mets 6-5 in terms of the tiebreakers. Now, if the Mets and Braves split the doubleheader, the Mets will clinch wildcard number 3 and have to go right back to Milwaukee that they were today and play the Brewers. The Braves would clinch wild card number 2, and they would play the Padres in San Diego. The Diamondbacks would be eliminated from contention, with the Mets and the Braves both having their tiebreaker. If the Mets were to sweep the doubleheader, which would probably be the best case scenario, or maybe not, since there's 3 different time zones in like 3 different days, the Mets would play the Padres, who they played in 2020, and they played in 2022, being in wild card number 2. And then the Diamondbacks would get wild card number 3 to try and defend their National League title and play the Brewers in Milwaukee, where the Mets were just. And it would be a dream scenario to see the Braves not in the playoffs in that situation. Now, worst case scenario for the Mets, which would basically be followed by sorrow. If the Braves sweep this doubleheader, the Braves will get wild card number 2 and play the Padres. The Diamondbacks would get wild card number 3 and play the Brewers. And the Mets would be eliminated from playoff contention, and they will watch October from the couch. We will see what our fate lies by, I guess, like 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock tomorrow. A lot is at stake tomorrow. And for those of you in your confidence level in the Mets clinching, I asked you guys in the chat in our poll, make sure to vote if you have not already, asking, do you believe the Mets can clinch tomorrow in Atlanta? 65% of you are saying yes, 17% of you are saying no, and 17% of you are 50-50. So we have some of a split with confidence level, let's just say that. We know this team. We know this Braves team well enough. We have seen them torture us for a long time. This is pretty much the same notes that we can bring out that we did last episode when we thought that this series actually would be played. But keys to this series, of course, this is it. This is it. You have no choice. You win one and you're in. You have 2 tries. Frank, in preview fashion of this series, before you do your last 2 post games of the season, what's going through your head right now going into this just defining series of the season?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's interesting to me is I'm going to go with the realistic aspect first. Now, Schellenbach has shut down the Mets the 2 times he faced them, most recently this past Tuesday. If Schellenbach shuts them down again and the Braves win, why would they pitch Chris Sale in game 2 and not have him in the playoff series? Like, I know the Braves have an amazing rotation and a really great pitching team.
I think this is what they're going to do. If the Braves win the first game, they're not starting Sale. They'll
start so that's what I'm saying. Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. Yeah. So because why would you not have Sale if you're ready, and why would you not have the Cy Young available for your playoff series? That, like, unless you hate, like, do you hate the Mets that much that you would rather just eliminate them? Because here's the thing that I'm thinking about is that the Braves purposely didn't pitch Sale against the Royals because they had so much confidence that they wouldn't necessarily need him. They just need him for the Mets on Monday, maybe. They were trying to save him. And again, I know the Braves have this amazing rotation because it's like, oh, well, you still could throw Ronaldo Lopez out there. You still have Max Fried. And then, I don't know if Charlie Moore will even be available because he pitched today. So who does that other game for you? Is it Holmes? Like, I think he pitched today as well. So I feel like who would start for the Braves then? That's kind of what I'm curious about. Like, let's say for the sake of argument, Braves win game 1. Who does start game 2? Because if it's just a no-name, like, you got to win that game. You have Severino against just the bullpen and the Braves not having anything to try for. Like, how do you actually lose both these games? You know what I mean? Like, that would be kind of crazy to me when you actually think about it. Are the Braves really willing to risk it to not have Sale available? Like, I just don't understand the incentive there. So, and listen, I don't know if maybe that's the thought process of the Mets as far as having McGill go game 1. And it's like, because we know no matter what, we'll win game 2, technically, if we lose game 1. So, but if we win game 1, then game 2 doesn't matter. Like, I don't know. Like, that could be a scenario. But, one of the things I'm looking at is, like I said, Severino has a second crack at the Braves in the span of a week. He needs to be better. Like, he absolutely needs to turn in a better start this time around. And now that this is the third time the Mets have faced Schwellenbach, can they finally come through? Like, can we see some right-handed hitters actually go the other way with a slider? Could Alonso actually hit a slider to the opposite field and some of these other guys? Marte, could he finally do that for me? Like, that would be great to see. So that's one of the things I'm watching. And then my other thing is the utilization of Edwin Diaz. Now, I imagine the Mets are going to utilize him the way they did in that Philly series. Like, am I crazy to say that if we have the lead in the seventh inning, I might bring Edwin Diaz in and say go 3 innings? Am I crazy to say that? Like, I mean, I don't know. I just feel like with how some of these other guys in the bullpen have been, I'd consider it. Like, I feel like it's that point where you got to play for today to get to tomorrow. You can't think about tomorrow. You got to win today. So I feel like that kind of sense of urgency is something I'm also looking at as well.
Yeah, I mean, with Diaz, what we all know about Diaz is that even if he were to pitch 3 innings, he would be like, okay, I'm available for game 1 of the playoffs if this works out. Like, we know that Diaz is going to say that. He said, whenever they need me, I'm out there. We all know that they've been saving a lot of bullets for Diaz this year, and I've talked about the full-on usage of him, which has been, I mean, it's been stagnant, obviously, with the 2 days off, the blowouts and everything. And I get they want to save him. But no, I'm full on. I was full on in favor of them putting him in the 9th today because, he needed to get work in as well. And we saw kind of the effects of that. He wasn't throwing as hard to start off. Like, he was starting to get the adrenaline towards the end there, but he wasn't throwing as hard. Like, I need to keep Edwin Diaz sharp. I need to keep him sharp. And it's good to have a reliever like that where they need to pitch a lot to remain sharp, which is good because you get your money's worth. You do. I know that he's had some blowups. I know it's happened. He hasn't been the dominant self this year fully in campaign. But if his usage is something that defines him to be sharp, I mean, that's the best reliever to have right there. And I know he is going to make himself available because he wants to. Like, he has talked about this. He's going to make himself available for both of these games. If he pitches 2 innings in that first game, I'm sure that he's going to make himself available even though the Mets clinched. That's how I know how Edwin Diaz's mindset goes out. That's how I know. Because he's Edwin Diaz. That's how he does it. Obviously, I wouldn't pitch him if we already clinched again, because the next day we would have to use him. But at the end of the day, I mean, that's just the main usage of Edwin Diaz. I mean, that he likes to pitch a lot. He's talked about this before. And you're really starting to see it. Like, he makes a lot of appearances and he looks better every single time when he pitches more. And that's a good type of pitcher to have,
that is a good point because he was better last Sunday when he threw a lot on Saturday and then had to pitch a lot on Sunday than he did waiting a week. And like you said, I hope that 96 was because he was purposely throwing 96 because I did notice that the velo was down and I was like, I hope he's doing that on purpose.
He hasn't pitched in a week, He hasn't pitched in a week, like 6 days. He didn't pitch at all. Like, he didn't pitch at all for 2 days.
Can you imagine being that good where you're like, I don't have to try, like I can still get everyone out. Meanwhile, all these, and that's because it's like all these other Mets trying their best, still can't get guys out. Yeah. Like, that's pretty crazy.
I mean, I know Edwin Diaz, when he's right, he can be effortlessly dominant. I mean, we know that he can be. We know that there's a lot of, like pushback, of course, with, his mental and, his mental game. And of course, but, they've treated it the best way, in my opinion. I think that they have. We talked about it going back, and even the broadcast mentioned it today. That blown save in Arizona, and they brought him right back out there the next day. And even though it was, soul-crushing, giving up the grand slam, game-defying that, and right now when you're talking about that now in hindsight, they brought him back out there, got him right, and ever since then he's been pretty good. But also then you think about it as to, like, right now with Edwin Diaz, now that's helping us out more than ever because of the tiebreaker we have on Arizona. See, if that didn't happen, that domino probably wouldn't fall in this current predicament that they're in. So that was so important, and it basically tells you how important Edwin Diaz's impact is on this team. And I think that when you talk about it from the standpoint of you need your star in there for the biggest game, he's going to be available. Now, obviously, there's nothing that we haven't said already. This is the team that continues to torment us no matter what. They tormented us earlier this week. It seemed like just the same thing over and over again. The House of Horrors. The Mets have won in Atlanta before. They've won games before. They even blew them out in Atlanta early on today. But again, when it all comes down to it, when they need to win, they just haven't been able to get the job done in the past. But now, when we're talking about Tylor Megill in game one, here's how I would look at this. I don't know if this is going to be how they look at it. Again, I'm not in the front office, but here's how I look at it. When it comes to Tylor Megill, he doesn't give us a quality start tomorrow. That will be the last start he ever makes in the major leagues. He's automatically a reliever next year. Don't want to see him make a start ever again. That's how I look at it. Because when you're talking about some of these other pieces and all these traveling pieces coming in and out of where you have some of these free agents pending as well in the rotation, I want to go into this offseason looking at guys as factors and not as just depth. David Peterson has earned his rotation spot for next year. He's earned it. Time for Tylor Megill to do the same. This is a winner-go-home game. And even though the Mets can lose the first game, this is a big test for Megill. And also, on the other side, Luis Severino's got to come through as well. Let's not forget, that first game that we're talking about, we're wrapping it up. That first game in Atlanta, not great. It wasn't great. And at the end of the day, if we get, I want to see from Tylor Megill, I want to see a quality start. And if not, 5 scoreless, 5 one-run ball. Give me something. Give me something that puts us in the position to win the game. And if not, again, we'll have to take different measures in game 2. But this is a big start for Tylor Megill. Hopefully he could close it out for us. I would love for it to happen. We already know about my soft spot for him. So I hope it happens. But again, if he doesn't, he's going to be putting us in an even more tough situation. Let's just say that. Pitching is definitely going to be one of the big factors here. It has been one of the make or breaks for these past 4 games for the Mets. And we're going to have to get it. I know that the Braves can slug at any point. You're not going to be able to outslug them. Maybe you won't be able to outpitch them because Schwellenbach and Sale are great. But every pitch counts here. You have 2 games left. I think that that's pretty much how you look at it. And hopefully the Mets can finally come through. It all came down in hindsight. The Mets just needed to win 1 game in Atlanta, and they had the division. Well, now all you need to do is win 1 game in Atlanta, and you have a playoff spot. 2 years later. Any other notes that you want to add? Because I feel like we said most of this stuff last episode when we thought this series was going to happen the way that it didn't happen. But, there's tons of keys going into this. That the Mets just have to overcome a lot of demons here and get the job done.
Yeah, I think, like you said, just kind of showing the improvements from 2 years ago. So, again, those guys, Nimmo and Alonso, you got to step up. Again, this is a legitimate playoff game for the Mets tomorrow. So this is really a good time to get your battle reps in and get ready for what's going to be happening. If you win this is what every game is going to be like. So you have to get used to winning and finding a way to win. So if that is stealing, if that is doing some different things, then that's what's got to happen. So I do want to see them kind of really finally come through in a playoff game. This way they're ready for the actual playoffs, because like I say, it's one thing to get there, but what are you going to do when you get there? Do you want to get there again just to be gone a few days later, or do you want to actually make a run? So I think that's the other big thing too. Is like this is legitimately a playoff game tomorrow. Both are playoff games, honestly. Whichever one you win, fine. But you got to do it. It's not like the scenario of maybe the Diamondbacks just lose their way out, or maybe this team will just lose their way out and we can still get in. It ain't gonna happen. You got to win one of them. You got to do it yourself. You control your own destiny. You have to feel for Arizona, where Arizona needs like somebody to sweep here, or as they're just sitting on the couch waiting to watch it happen. You're in a much better chance where you have the chance to win it and get it yourself.
Yeah, not to mention if there is a sweep of this, hopefully it is a Mets sweep. If there is a sweep, it will be a following year where both World Series teams from last year don't make the playoffs.
That would be interesting.
So you're going to have a different that's going to be a different piece of competition. So let's just say that. That's something to look at, and we know that Arizona was struggling to start the year, and they kind of just caught fire, and that's why they're in this current situation. But again, this is it. These are the last 2 games of the entire MLB regular season. All eyes are on them as of right now. And speaking on things that we do have some eyes on, of course, going forward, let's get to the injury report. 2 that we have that are the major situations right now. Kodai Senga, in the last few days, started throwing, and he is due to progress to facing hitters, but at this current moment, there is no timetable for him to return to the mound and or a return in the possible postseason in a deep run. They're kind of just taking it easy, of course, but he is still trying to work his way back to pitching form after experiencing tricep tightness after his rehab outing in 1 inning for AAA Syracuse last week. Francisco Alvarez, quite a week it has been for him. He exited Friday's game in Milwaukee due to back spasms after sliding into third base. He felt a lot better at the end of the game. He did not start the next game in game 2, came in as a pinch hitter. He looked fine. He exited Sunday's game as well with a tight right hamstring, but he does not expect it to linger. So it's most likely, like we said, you have 2 different catchers for these 2 different games regarding Francisco Alvarez and his health. But again, catchers take these types of hits all the goddamn time, and that's just basically something that you just have to deal with, whether you're talking about Francisco Alvarez, who is 22 years old, or somebody like Salvador Perez, who's 33 or 32 or whatever. That's just catchers get banged up. That's just what happens. Now, as for going forward, as we end it off here, we have gone over the 2-hour mark, but if you can't tell, there's going to be some chaos, let's just say, going forward. As for content scheduling, tomorrow we will be going live for another 2 hours, another episode of the Mets Weekly Podcast. When it comes to the playoffs, if they do make it, we will end up be doing pre-games and post-game streams before and after these games. So it's possible that if the Mets make the playoffs and the series goes 3 games like it did 2 years ago, we most likely will be doing a total of 8 live streams in the span of 5 days, which is just absolutely insane, but hey, whatever. Now, tomorrow, regarding the next episode, after this doubleheader, we will be talking about the Mets season in general, recapping everything, giving our regular season awards. I also hope to be doing a top 5 regarding the postseason as well. And then also something that has been asked many, many times, we will be bringing back, and most likely we'll do it for a majority of the offseason regarding if there is time. We will be having viewers call into the show tomorrow. So for those of you who have questions that you want to ask us live on air, we'll bring in your audio. We're not going to do any video because of, safety reasons in that regard. But you guys will get a few minutes to talk if you guys want to. Call into the show and ask us a question regarding your thoughts. Hopefully they're awesome thoughts that we're going to the playoffs, or if the Mets get eliminated, There might be some angry thoughts. Let's hope this doesn't turn into a certain radio station when they do call-ins. But again, anything is on the table. So for those of you who want to call in or just love the sound of your own voice, let us know. And also, our co-host Andrew will also be here. The three of us, so you'll get to talk to all three of us. And then you get to let us know which of the co-hosts you like better. You'll give us a ranking system, all of that stuff. But in terms of this stream right now that we are on at this current moment, thank you guys so much for watching, listening. For those of you who tuned in live, for those of you who have been watching episodes throughout the entire season, and it has been quite a long one. For those of you who popped in for a little bit, thank you guys so much for all the love and support throughout the entire season. Make sure to subscribe to the Mets Weekly channel if you have not already. Turn on post notifications for this very podcast that will be up for a very special episode tomorrow live. And of course, the audio versions that drop at 9 a.m. the following day. Make sure to follow Mets Weekly on TikTok and on X. TikTok, Frank will be doing his post games before our Frank will be doing his post games before we go live, of course, after the first game and the second game. So make sure to follow us on that. And once again, the last thing to say, follow everyone individually. Let's go Mets. That's it. That's all I got to say. Win, and you're in. We'll see you guys next time, which will be tomorrow.